The Young and the Restless. Spoilers. Shock. Next week, July 14th to July 18th, 2025. The chapel was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting fragments of color across the polished floors and heavy oak pews. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that arrives just before a decision must be made, when silence becomes deafening and memory takes the form of ghosts that linger in the corners of a room. Victoria Newman stood at the center of it all, her figure rigid, silhouetted against the altar where Cole Howard's memorial was meant to take place. Her face bore the weight of grief, but more than that, it bore the ache of absence. The people who should have been there to help carry this burden, to stand with her in the final goodbye, were oceans away, cut off by geography and circumstance. Her father Victor, mother Nikki, her brother Nick, even Kyle. Stranded in Nice, unreachable by phone, adrift in a world where no signal could cross the distance between them in this moment. She had spent hours pacing the Newman Tower suite earlier that morning, waiting for a call that never came, staring at her phone as if willing it to vibrate, to light up, to give her a sign. But there was nothing. Not even Adam had called with news. And now, standing here beside Claire, Victoria felt that the question gnawing at her heart could no longer wait. Should the memorial go on, even in the absence of family? Could she bear the weight of closure without the pillars that had defined her life standing beside her? She looked to Claire, her daughter, her mirror, her reminder of every mistake and every redemptive possibility that Cole had brought into their lives. The girl was composed, but Victoria could see the storm beneath her expression, the vulnerability in the way her fingers clenched the folded program in her hands. This wasn't just a farewell to a man, they were saying goodbye to the fragile, painful hope of something they never fully had, a family whole and healed. The guests had already begun to gather quietly, filling in pews with respectful silence. A few whispered condolences as they took their seats. Others sat alone, eyes cast down. The room was intimate but formal, reflective of Cole's own temperament, thoughtful, reserved, quietly generous. There were no grand floral arrangements, no sweeping eulogies scripted by corporate handlers. Just space. Space for reflection. For grief. For remembering. Victoria's heart twisted. She knew Cole wouldn't have wanted a spectacle, but how could she proceed without Victor, without Nikki, without Nick by her side? They were more than family, they were her history, her foundation. Their absence made this feel incomplete, unmoored. She turned slightly, as if expecting to see her father stride through the doors, black coat flaring behind him, offering a firm nod that meant everything would be handled. But no one came. The decision pressed harder now. The officiant approached gently, asking if they were ready to begin. Victoria hesitated, her voice caught somewhere between breath and heartbreak. Claire placed a hand on her arm. "We're here," she whispered. "And we need to do this. For him." Her voice was steady, despite the tears in her eyes. Victoria nodded slowly, her throat tightening. She looked around the room once more and made her choice, not because the others weren't important, but because grief waits for no one, and some goodbyes have to be faced without the comfort of the familiar. As the service began, Victoria stepped to the podium, her voice trembling but resolute. She spoke not as an executive or a daughter, but as a woman who had loved, lost, and survived. She spoke of Cole's quiet intelligence, his strength, the complicated love they shared, and the daughter he never stopped trying to understand. Her words filled the space like music, soft, mournful, but beautiful in their honesty. Claire followed, speaking with a wisdom far beyond her years, recounting memories pieced together from fragments of time and emotion. There were tears in the audience, nods of shared sorrow, moments where silence said more than language ever could. And still, no word from Nice. Across the Atlantic, in the gilded suite of a secluded villa overlooking the French Riviera, Victor Newman stood by a tall window, a satellite phone in his hand, brows furrowed in frustration. The signal had died hours ago, and every attempt to reach Genoa City had failed. Nikki sat beside him, worry etched across her face, clutching the envelope containing her intended eulogy for Cole. Nick paced the room restlessly, knowing that back home, his sister was shouldering this loss alone. It was Victor who finally spoke. "She'll do it," he said. "Victoria's stronger than she knows. She'll carry him home, with or without us." But the guilt lingered like a shadow none of them could shake. Back in Genoa City, the ceremony ended with a quiet benediction. People stood, embracing one another, filing out slowly. Victoria remained by the altar, eyes on the small table holding Cole's portrait. Claire stood with her, silent. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't need to. In that moment, surrounded by absence, they found a kind of peace, not because the grief had passed, but because they had endured it together. But just as they turned to leave, a movement in the doorway caught their eye. Adam stood there, breathless, suit rumpled, eyes heavy with urgency. He had run from the airport, through the city, unable to reach anyone by phone, desperate not to miss it. He paused when he saw them, apology written all over his face. But Victoria only nodded, a silent thank you. And then, for the first time all day, she allowed herself to cry. Far from the turmoil unraveling in Genoa City, the gardens of the French countryside estate were suspended in an almost dreamlike stillness. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting golden light over the hedges and stone pathways that twisted through the elaborate labyrinth that surrounded the villa. The scent of lavender and wild jasmine hung thick in the air, mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by the breeze. It was here, amidst the hedged walls of a place meant for retreat and reflection, that Lily Winters made a decision she had wrestled with for far too long. Her heart had been at war with itself for months. Grieving the illusion of stability, mourning the ghost of a love that had long since soured. And Damien Kane had been the one constant in the chaos, the man who had stood beside her not out of convenience or obligation, but with a quiet strength that made her feel seen, respected, wanted. There had been tension between them for weeks now, emotional and physical, unresolved and undeniable. And now, at the edge of the labyrinth's center, surrounded by roses blooming defiantly against ancient stone, Lily stopped walking. She turned to Damien, eyes searching his face, reading the concern and uncertainty buried beneath his controlled calm. And before reason could interfere, before fear could take back her agency, she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate. A quiet rebellion against the expectations that had confined her for too long. Damien froze for a moment, surprised, but then melted into the kiss, one hand reaching to cup her face, the other pulling her closer with a tenderness that spoke of months of unspoken longing. They had danced around the line between companionship and intimacy for too long. Now, Lily crossed it, with purpose. She wanted to feel something real. And for the first time in what felt like years, she did. But the labyrinth had eyes. Unbeknownst to them, Kane Ashby had wandered into the far side of the garden, pacing restlessly beneath the towering hedges. He hadn't meant to spy. He hadn't meant to intrude. But when he turned the corner and saw them, Lily and Damien in each other's arms, locked in a kiss that was anything but platonic, he froze. Time seemed to stall. The air left his lungs. For a long moment, he simply watched, unmoving, a storm of fury and heartbreak building behind his eyes. It wasn't just jealousy. It was possession. Betrayal. And a sickening confirmation of what he had feared since the day he returned to Genoa City. Lily had moved on. And worse, she had chosen him to Damien, the man Kane saw as a threat to everything he had been trying to rebuild. His fists clenched at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, to march forward and demand an explanation, to make a scene that would crack this fragile piece like glass. But he didn't. He remained still, watching from behind the hedge, the shadows of the late afternoon concealing the rage simmering behind his impassive face. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Silent. Controlled. But not defeated. Because Kane Ashby did not retreat. He regrouped. He recalibrated. And what he had just witnessed would become fuel. The game had changed. Now, it was personal. Back in Genoa City, a different kind of tension was unfolding. This time not from betrayal, but from the weight of history and the uncertainty of the future. Danny Romalotti stood at the center of crimson lights, the entire café transformed into a vision of romantic elegance. Candles flickered from every corner, casting soft shadows across walls strung with delicate white lights. A table for two sat beneath the skylight, framed by orchids and strings of crystal beads that shimmered like raindrops in the candlelight. Every detail had been considered. Music, flowers, even the dessert menu curated from Christine's favorite childhood memories. He had waited a long time for this moment. Too long. There had been other lives, other loves, and 1,000 reasons why the timing had never been quite right. But tonight, Danny felt clarity. Certainty. And he wanted Christine to feel it too. When she arrived, her breath caught in her throat. She saw the table, the lights, the man waiting with a nervous smile, and she knew. Her heart skipped, equal parts awe and apprehension. Danny greeted her gently, guiding her to the table, pouring champagne, making quiet jokes to ease the nerves in the room. And when dessert arrived, her favorite lemon tart drizzled with white chocolate, he stood. Reached into his pocket. And lowered himself to one knee. The café fell completely silent. Christine, he said, voice low, trembling slightly, we've spent a lifetime finding our way back to each other. And I don't want to waste another moment wondering what might have been. Will you marry me? The words hung in the air like a delicate chord, vibrating through the silence. Christine stared at him, the ring glinting in the soft light, her hands shaking slightly. Her mind raced, not because she didn't love him, but because of everything that came before. The past hadn't always been kind to them. There had been misunderstandings, heartbreaks, lost time. Could she truly say yes and believe that this time it would last? Her eyes met his. And in them, she saw not the mistakes of yesterday, but the promise of tomorrow. Still, she hesitated. Not out of doubt, but out of gravity. Because this wasn't just a proposal, it was a new beginning. And some beginnings were so big, so precious, they deserved to be answered not with haste, but with reverence. She began, voice soft, uncertain. Then she paused, swallowing hard. I need time. Danny nodded slowly, disappointment flashing briefly across his face, but respect in his eyes. Take all the time you need, he whispered. And though the answer had not been what he'd hoped for, he knew that sometimes love had to wait. Sometimes the heart needed room to be sure. And if anyone knew how to wait for love, it was Danny Romalotti. Back in France, Kane stood on a balcony overlooking the labyrinth, a single drink in his hand, the shadows long behind him. Below, he could still hear the faint echo of laughter, of two people who had found solace in each other's arms. But his mind was already racing ahead. He would not confront Lily tonight. No. That would be too easy. Instead, he would return to Genoa City with new resolve. Let them think he'd been defeated. Let them celebrate their stolen moment. Because by the time he made his next move, everything they valued would already be slipping through their fingers. And no one would see it coming. Phyllis Summers had never been one to walk the middle line. Her instincts had always pushed her to pick a side, even when the choice wasn't clear, even when the consequences were volatile. And yet, standing across from Nick Newman inside society's quiet wine room, she found herself momentarily suspended in the kind of gray space she loathed. The meeting had been spontaneous, or at least, that's what Nick wanted her to believe. But Phyllis knew better. There was always purpose when a Newman made time to speak in private. And when she saw the tension carved into Nick's expression, the slight hesitancy in his voice, the carefully chosen words that danced around direct accusation, she knew, he wasn't just here to talk about Kane. He was here to test her. Nick, as always, led with a mask of casual concern, but his tone was firm beneath the pleasantries. He believed Phyllis should be standing with the Newmans. Against Kane, against chaos, against whatever grand scheme was currently unraveling under the surface of Genoa City's corporate ecosystem. And to an outsider, that alignment might seem natural. After all, hadn't she fought beside them before? Hadn't she built alliances, made sacrifices, even burned bridges for the greater good when the time came? But things weren't so simple anymore. Not for Phyllis. Because Nick didn't know the full truth, not yet. He didn't know that her allegiance had already been pledged elsewhere. That she had shaken hands with the very man the Newmans now viewed as their greatest threat. That she had chosen, for reasons of survival and self-interest, to work with Kane Ashby, strategically, cautiously, but definitively. She had her reasons. Some pragmatic, some personal. Kane offered her leverage, and Phyllis understood leverage better than anyone. Still, watching Nick now, standing in a room that once held laughter and whispered secrets, made her stomach twist in a way she didn't like. He wasn't here to accuse her, not outright, but his expectations were clear. He wanted loyalty. Family loyalty. He framed it as protecting what mattered. But to Phyllis, it sounded a lot like being told what to think. She smiled, deflecting, offering vague reassurances and pointed questions, watching carefully to see if he would push harder. But something shifted mid-conversation. A tremor. A flicker. Nick's focus wavered, just for a moment, and Phyllis's instincts went on high alert. It was in the way his eyes darted briefly to the floor, the way his fingers tightened slightly on the stem of his glass. She changed the subject, subtly, steering toward a different line of inquiry, something she did often when she sensed discomfort. And that's when she saw it, the tell. He was hiding something. Not about her. About something else. Something bigger. She asked him a simple question: what happened at the Ashworth district this week? And his response was immediate, defensive. That's not important right now, he muttered, brushing it off like a man waving away smoke before a fire could be seen. That's when Phyllis knew. Whatever Nick had seen, or done, wasn't just sensitive. It was dangerous. And it was eating at him. She didn't press, at least not directly. Not yet. Instead, she leaned back, adopting a tone that danced between concern and provocation. You're not as calm as you think you are, Nick. Something's bothering you. You've seen something, and it's rattled you. He exhaled sharply, forced a grin, said she was imagining things. But the grin didn't reach his eyes. Don't try to turn this around, he said, a little too quickly. We're talking about where you stand, Phyllis. About who you're backing. But Phyllis had already mentally shifted gears. The question of alliances could wait. Because now, the more pressing mystery wasn't Kane. It was Nick. And what the hell he was keeping buried behind that practiced poker face. As they parted, Nick told her to think carefully about her choices. The words were meant as a warning, but they landed like an evasion. Phyllis walked away with more questions than answers. She could still feel it, the way his tone cracked slightly when she mentioned the eastern property sites. The way he deflected when she brought up the Chancellor drone incident, the fire report discrepancies, the unnamed security contractors who had been working off the books. He wasn't just worried about Kane taking over Newman. He was worried about something much darker, something he'd witnessed firsthand and couldn't bring himself to share. Back in her suite at the Grand Phoenix, Phyllis began her own investigation. She called in favors, pulled strings, accessed security feeds, incident reports, even background scans on Nick's recent activity. She pieced together timelines, cross-referenced Kane's property buys with Newman's confidential site assessments. And then she found it, a timestamp. A 7-minute gap in surveillance footage from one of the Chancellor Winter's developments where Nick had reportedly been doing a surprise inspection. No logs. No escort. Just a shadow movement through a restricted construction zone that coincided with the arrival of a black, unmarked transport vehicle registered to a company linked to Kane Ashby. Phyllis stared at the screen, the data blinking back at her like a dare. Whatever Nick had seen, whatever he was hiding, it was connected to Kane. But in what way? Was Nick covering something up to protect someone? Was he being blackmailed? Was he a witness to something unspeakable? Or, worse, was he trying to shield Phyllis from a truth he thought she couldn't handle? The days ahead would demand answers. Not just about loyalty, but about conscience. About fear. About how far people were willing to go to protect secrets buried beneath the shiny veneer of power. And Phyllis? She had never been afraid to dig. If Nick wouldn't give her the truth, she would take it. And when she did, nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same again. If you'd like, I can continue this storyline with Phyllis uncovering what Nick witnessed, possibly involving a secret deal gone wrong, a hidden body, or an unthinkable betrayal. Just say the word.